Can you test on your microphone? Hello, mic test 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, that's good.
On the video?
Yeah. You go offline.
Sorry?
Sorry, guys, I'm magically doing virtual streaming.
I'll just mention the audience.
Is the screen mirrored, Charlotte?
On the, no.
No, cool.
Good. Ready to go.
Can you say something, Scarce?
Yeah, can you still hear me all right? Hello?
Perfect.
Right, go. Right, go. Just a minute. Ready? All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Flinders New Venture Institute. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that we meet today on the traditional land of the Kaurna people and pay my respects to their elders past and present. We're really excited to have Jarrod here today for a very interactive session about everything from the big giants to how you can kind of convert their lessons to your own startup to scale up. He's got a very impressive resume, but for today's purposes, we'll say he's here from Pitch Labs, and he'll let us know more about that later. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to him.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you very much, guys. Very excited to be here. Did you know there are 6 types of presentation? Informative, instructive, persuasive, motivating, decision-making, and progress. As a self-proclaimed passionate storyteller, I found myself struggling with the type of presentation I wanted to deliver today. I started down the path of thinking, should I create an informative presentation? Perhaps an instructive presentation. But at my core, I actually wanted to stand before you and persuade you, motivate you, inspire you, and even excite you into telling your very own story. I caution you, the version you walk away telling may not be the version you are necessarily used to telling. So I find myself conflicted. Do I stick with the script and inform you on the content to include in a pitch deck, or even the collateral to squeeze into a sales deck? Perhaps instead, I talk to you about where to invest your money, or even better, where to get your money. Or maybe, just maybe, I talk to you about my very own entrepreneurial itch and the tools I use to scratch it. You know what? I say that we ditch the script, and if we can incorporate some of those elements, then awesome. But ultimately, today is about inspiring you to tell your own story. Here's to an hour of power as I share the stories of companies that have set sail for scale. Now, just in case you've turned up to the wrong workshop, my name is Jarrod, and I am a scale-up specialist and passionate storyteller. I started my career with KPMG in Sydney at the ripe old age of 18. I have since exited the entrepreneurial rollercoaster, supported the launch of Groupon in Australia, scaled Nearmap to ASX tech darling, and revelled in the rebrand and relaunch of buy now, pay later product HUMM. Today, I am leveraging my scale-up experience in support of hypergrowth companies as founder of Pitch Labs. I am also a former state bagpipe champion, the Milky Bar Kid in the 1991 Western parody TV commercial, and a proud new dad. I can also tell you that one of those 3 statements is a lie, but we'll come to that later. I thought I might kick us off by sharing my favorite story of all time. Well, perhaps favorite sales deck of all time. Before I dive in, I want everyone playing along at home and here in the audience to try and identify the one thing that really, really stands out about this story. If the technology allows, I'd love to receive your feedback at the end before I share my own thoughts. So let's bring it up. Zora, turning customers into subscribers. We now live in a subscription economy. #shift happens. A shift from products to relationships. The way people buy has changed for good. We have new expectations. We demand outcomes, not ownership. We want customization, not generalization. And we want constant improvement, not the typical planned obsolescence. We are experiencing a global phenomenon with 80% of customers demanding new consumption models. 50% of people in France are moving away from traditional ownership. 80% of German companies have dealt with the issue of subscription business models, and $420 billion was spent on subscriptions in the US in 2015, which is up from $215 billion in 2000. Every industry is shifting. Leaders are creating new experiences through a new kind of business model, from consumer goods to high tech, even media and communication. The best companies have reinvented themselves away from products. It's all about the relationships. In the last 15 years, 52% of the Fortune 500 companies have disappeared. In 1955, the average life expectancy was 75 years. In 2015, the average life expectancy is 15 years. So over a 60-year period, we've lost 60 years in average life expectancy, which by my math is 1 year every year, which should mean the year 2030 could be quite exciting. Who survived this mass extinction? General Electric moved from light bulbs to digital services. IBM from punch card tabulators to cognitive data services. Unilever bought Dollar Shave Club for $1 billion to challenge Procter & Gamble. And Amazon, Google, Apple, Facebook, Salesforce identified themselves as the relationship makers. Uber, Spotify, Box, and Airbnb announced themselves as the new disruptors. So, what is the common thread? They understand that we want the subscription experience. Ongoing value, memorable experiences, on-demand fulfillment, anywhere in real time with personalized service. It's a new way of thinking, from products distributed through channel partners to the subscriber being at the core of the entire experience. This changes everything. Pricing has shifted from unit sales to value. Marketing from branding to experience. Sales has moved away from selling products to solving needs. And finance has moved away from product margins to this idea of customer lifetime value, with culture shifting from those hit one-off products to deep relationships. The subscriber identity has also evolved to include demographic, behavioral, financial data. The traditional record is obsolete. No longer can we afford to capture only name, phone, email, and company. The new world demands history across purchases, products, refunds, lifetime value, and aging balances. That's why we built Zora, a unified solution for the subscription economy. #happy business. Zora then goes on to include testimonials from Box, Financial Times, and Schneider, before concluding with another hashtag, start your story. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I just want to go and launch a subscription business now, simply so that I can implement the Zora subscription billing model. So does anybody have any thoughts on what makes this deck so incredibly powerful? And I'll give you a clue. It's not the amazing hashtags, although hashtag start your story. I think the technology is going to challenge us a little bit at this point. So for me, it's the fact that in a deck of 24 slides, only one of those slides talks to the product. Fancy that, a single slide on product. The temptation for most founders is to vomit up every detail about their precious product. We get it, you guys are proud, but as an investor has already made up their mind about your product based almost exclusively on your value proposition. Instead, they are thinking about the dollars and how they are going to sell it. So stick to the 5 elements of a brilliant sales narrative as highlighted by Andy Raskin. 1, name a big, relevant change in the world. 2, show there will be winners and losers. 3, tease the idea of the promised land. 4, introduce features as magic gifts that solve problems. And 5, present evidence that you can make the story come true. At this point, I would like to introduce you to one of my favorite storytelling platforms. Has anyone heard of Beautiful.ai? The beautiful thing about presenting to a remote audience is that I actually can't see any hands shooting up. So I can get excited now about showing it off. With a tagline that reads, "Be proud of what you present," my curiosity is already lit. As somebody who has some OCD tendencies and utterly detests PowerPoint, Beautiful uses artificial intelligence to enable automated design. You simply add your content and watch your slides adapt. There is no more tweaking text boxes or lining up arrows at 2 o'clock in the morning. The AI applies the rules of great design in real time. So it's finally easy to tell your story. God, I actually sound like one of their sales reps, but jokes aside, grab your phones and bookmark Beautiful.ai. For me, one of the coolest things about Beautiful are the PowerPoint makeovers teased in their blog. How about we take a look at the makeover they did on Airbnb pitch deck? First up, I'll show you the original deck. Guys, just for those that have seen the screen, this is the Beautiful AI website itself, so check it out and navigate. But this is the original Airbnb pitch deck. It's pretty vanilla, right? Let's have a quick scroll through. So sure, this deck was successful in raising a little bit of money, but imagine how much more money they might have raised with this, the made-over deck. Again, this was all achieved using what is Beautiful AI. It still talks to similar content in the problem and the solution. It teases a number of different solutions. It works through what is the market validation. It teases the market size. It produces content that is powerfully simple. Unfortunately, these videos aren't playing. Let's see if we can refresh it. We'll race through these again. Apologies, guys. It wouldn't have been justice to show you the deck without the moving images, power of what is the Airbnb model. Simply search by location, review listings, and book. It then gives you a teaser as to the business model, and then talks as to how they're going to achieve market adoption. Again, it lists a number of partnerships and talks to potential opportunities with Craigslist. This slide for me is far easier to digest in terms of what the competitive landscape looks like. And again, it talks to a couple of competitive advantages. And concludes with the team. And of course, a couple of press mentions. With the user testimonials in much the same way that the Zora deck did. Pretty clever from a design perspective. At the risk of sounding a little crass, a sexy deck really sells. So guys, again, I encourage you to jump on Beautiful, check it out. If you're working through that capital raising stage in your journey, then produce your deck in Beautiful. You get one opportunity to make that first impression. So, while we're on the topic of makeovers, I'd also like to give a shout out to Causal. No, not casual, but Causal. C-A-U-S-A-L. Causal is to Excel what Beautiful is to PowerPoint. In my ever so humble opinion, Causal will be the death of spreadsheets. Basically, it's a better way to perform calculations, visualize data, and communicate with numbers. Don't forget that an important chapter in every scale-up story is the chapter that speaks to numbers. Your numbers need to be as sexy as your words. As a startup founder, you probably panic at the thought of Excel. It's likely you've never had to build out a financial model, but don't panic. Give me a minute and I'll bring up the platform that is sure to raise a smile. So again, guys, this is Causal, the death of the spreadsheet, right? Taimul, the founder, is based out of the UK, but I encourage all of the businesses that I work with to build out what are their financial models for inclusion in their pitch decks using what is Causal. The most exciting part about the platform for me are the live templates. And so if you are building out a SaaS or e-commerce business, there are templates there which simply require you to input your metrics. You don't have to build the model from scratch. The model is there. You just need to know your underlying metrics. And so what I might do at this point is jump into the SaaS model, because SaaS seems to be a bit of a flavor of not even the month anymore, but year, and show you exactly how powerful this platform can be. So this is what Causal calls their dashboard, right? So again, it's about that data visualization. It's about that, I suppose, interactivity with investors as well. But more importantly, it negates the need for a founder to be able to build out these financial models for themselves in Excel. And so what I might do is actually jump into the model and show you how easy it is. Now, apologies guys, that's pretty small on the screen, but we're talking to a SaaS model at this point. So in this particular instance, all the model's asking you to do is include metrics such as your average revenue per user, the ARPU metric, right? Which, as the founder of a SaaS business, is something you really should know. And so this is drawing out a lot of the information that you as the founder of that business should actually know and should be planning for. It's also saying, okay, what gross margin are we targeting? And in this instance, it's 87.5%. Also, what is the cost of acquisition per customer? The really cool thing about Causal is that it doesn't require you simply input one value in isolation. You can actually input a range so that you can do scenario planning. So rather than the cost of acquisition being 30, what happens if we reduce that to 20? What does that do to my revenue? What does that do to my cost base? Similarly, you input some of your growth assumptions. So in this case, you're starting out with 30 subscribers. You're going to add 50 subscribers in the next month, and then you're going to apply a growth rate of 15% in the first year and thereafter. A SaaS model is going to encourage you to consider churn. So what is your churn rate? And then of those churned customers, how many are you likely to reactivate and bring back onto the platform? And so again, if you are setting down the path of launching what is a SaaS business, these are all the metrics that you need to know. But hopefully you can see there isn't a need to build the model. The model's there. You just need to know your metrics. Similarly, it then works through what are the outputs. So based on the variables that we've input into this model, we're talking annual recurring revenue of $3.3 million with growth of 15%, monthly recurring revenue churn of $100,000, and an equivalent growth rate. The really cool thing about this model are the fact that lifetime value and cost of acquisition are there as outputs and inputs. And these are metrics that investors will demand that you know. And so again, for me, it is one of the most powerful storytelling platforms for numbers. So imagine producing a deck that has beautiful AI leading your, let's call it word content, and something like causal leading your numbers content. All of a sudden, I think you're going to be able to derive what is a pretty powerful story that should support in what is the raise of those subsequent investment funds. I might just jump back again because I'm mindful that not everybody in the audience today is a founder of a business. And so if you are a little bit more financially minded or mathematically minded or even curious, there are some fun other models that I would encourage you guys to play around with. Should I join a startup or Google, right? A really fun model that you can go in and interact with. Should I buy a house or should I continue renting? Again, Tamel's built out these models for you to interact with, have fun with, learn what is the platform, but then obviously apply that to what is your own use case as well. So guys, don't be shy, jump in there, have a lot of fun. Both of the platforms that I've mentioned are free as well until you work through to what are some of their premium features. The other thing that I wanted to call out that is quite a handy little platform, if you haven't come across it already, is a Chrome plugin called Loom. And so this video here, which is the explainer video on how causal works, actually enables Tamel, the founder, to embed himself as a video on top of what is a screen share. And so that Loom application is actually incredibly beneficial for those that you want to record what is a platform or product demonstration. So again, Loom is another one that I'll just throw out there for you guys to check out, but a really powerful tool in terms of, again, telling your story. So at this point, guys, I might return to the script and share with you the drama-filled story of my friend Nick. I get asked this question all the time. Where should I invest my bootstrapped funds? My answer is actually somewhat controversial because I genuinely believe that this initial money should be spent in support of trying to get your next round of money. There is a temptation as a founder, and believe me, I get it, I've been there myself, to spend the money that you have in building out your brand and your product. It's energizing, it's exciting, but it doesn't necessarily result in the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve by way of scale. Instead, I suggest investing those funds in your idea and your story. Founders think they need a working prototype that they have successfully commercialized before embarking on the journey of raising funds. I'm actually here to challenge that belief. Has anyone ever thought about telling a story so compelling that an angel investor can't help but throw money at you? Again, invest in your idea and your story. This pre-seed round will serve as external validation of your idea, and it will enable you to move into the brand and product with very likely more funds than what would have been the limit on your credit card. 2 birds, 1 stone. Idea validation, tick. Angel investment, tick. All because you told one hell of a story. Oh, and if you have a little bit of money left over, then structure, structure, structure. Now to my friend Nick. Nick is one of the best salespeople I have ever met. But the version of the story he was telling was the version nobody was buying. Nick came to me one day, all excited about his new startup. Jarrod, mate, I have this incredible idea. I'm going to launch a marketplace that competes against the likes of The Iconic and ASOS. And I'm going to target all of the boutique retailers because they're getting absolutely gouged on the margins. I think there's a huge opportunity here. I said, okay, Nick, that sounds pretty cool. And I've also got this technology that I've developed that uses photogrammetry techniques to map data points on a person's body and then marry that up with the sizing charts of all of the brands. And I said, hang on a second. Tell me that again. And so he repeats the story about the technology. And I said, Nick, that's the idea. It's not the marketplace. The marketplace is fun. The marketplace is exciting. But I actually think the value of what you're sitting on is the IP that you have created in that technology. Now, unfortunately, Nick then went on to confess to me that he had incorporated a proprietary limited company and that him and a buddy owned 50% of that company in their respective names as individuals. Now, obviously, as somebody that plays in the advisory space, it was hard not to go. I'm like, oh, Nick, are you sure? So we've now worked with Nick over a period of time to acknowledge the fact that actually there is a way better opportunity to explore that corporate structure. We can set up a head company. That head company can then own what is an IP company. The head company can also own what is a trading company. And then Nick, as the proprietor, can hold the shares in a discretionary family trust and therefore mitigate a lot of the risk that he would incur as an individual, protect those assets in what is the family trust, but then also, and more importantly, protect what is the IP of that particular idea in a standalone entity. So that if he makes a mistake as a director of that business, or something happens in what is the operating entity that causes that business to shut down, the IP is still protected in what is a standalone entity. Now, the reason that I wish Nick had come to us that little bit earlier, and hang on with me here, guys, because this might get a tiny bit technical, is the fact that over the journey, Nick had actually started creating some value in what was that IP. Now, unfortunately, he owned that IP in his individual name. Even though the IP was held in a company, he was the majority shareholder in that company. And so on our advice, we were saying, Nick, you really need to transfer the shares from your individual name into the family trust. However, in transferring those shares, it actually triggered a capital gains tax event. And so let's hypothesize, just for the sake of the example, that they'd spent maybe $100,000 in building out what was that IP. Nick all of a sudden has a capital gains event simply from transferring those shares into his family trust of $50,000. Now, as a startup founder, that's a tax liability that you absolutely want to be avoiding. And so we then went to work to think about some creative ways that we could work through the structure, achieve some sense of security for Nick, but obviously an optimal tax outcome for Nick as well, because if they are successful in commercializing this IP and they do go down the path of selling that IP, there could be quite a significant gain that you obviously want to optimize but protect. And so I guess the message here is make sure that when you are looking at spending your scarce funds, if you genuinely believe in the power of the idea, make sure you do seek some advice around how to structure that idea upfront, because I see so many founders that get really excited about what it is that they're doing. They work down the journey only to arrive at a point that is quite problematic, actually, both from an ownership perspective and ability to raise capital into the business, but also from a tax perspective. So it's probably the one thing that gets neglected as a startup founder, but my advice to you quite sincerely is consider the structure upfront. Cool. So at this point, I figure you guys might also want some level of insight into where you might be able to access a little bit of capital. Bear in mind that my advice is to start small, well in advance of spending on brand and product. So here are a couple of options. I'm going to talk a bit more specifically to the South Australian ecosystem, so apologies if anyone remote is interstate, but we have quite an active angel community here in South Australia. The Southern Angels comes to mind, so see if you can't plug into one of those networks. I think that really the idea of today is to motivate you into telling your story, so start telling your story in those networks. See if you can find a mentor, someone to coach you through what is that process. There's also quite a number of government grants that are available, and I'm positive that as a founder, you've heard that 100 times before, but the business.gov.au website actually now has capabilities of walking through what are your specific circumstances and almost spitting out what grants are applicable to you as that small business as well. So if the goal is to use the little bit of money that you have to get the next sum of money that you need, a grant can be quite powerful in that regard, as can a small angel investment. A couple of the other things that I'd encourage you to consider are the Office of the South Australian Chief Entrepreneur. Please don't get me to say that 3 times fast. It's a bit of a mouthful, but Kate, Mark, and Christian all love a cup of coffee, and I'm sure they're always open to a friendly approach. So again, give some consideration to what is the OSAS. Dave and Alex are absolutely awesome. They work together at the South Australian Venture Capital Fund. They have an incredible network here in South Australia that they might be able to expose you to. They can give you a little bit of validation on what is your idea as well. But that approach comes with a little bit of a warning because the South Australian Venture Capital Fund tends to invest in later stage companies. And they also require what is matched investment, although I think that's something that they're exploring at removing at the moment. But essentially that means if they are willing to give you $500,000, you need to get $500,000 from somewhere else so that the total investment becomes $1 million. They're putting up half, but they're essentially matching the investment that you have received from somewhere else. So a couple of ideas there just for some initial cash flow in support of what is the pre-seed stage. Obviously, the SAVCF is that later stage investment as well. So as we start to race the clock a little bit, I'm going to change up the audience of this story quickly, moving away from the founders and towards those with the itch. I'm positive there will be people in the audience who are thinking to themselves, but Jarrod, I don't have that rock star idea. I'm the person that executes. I'm not creative, but I desperately want to be involved. It turns out, guys, that I was exactly the same. So my advice to you is first and foremost, keep an eye on trends. Quite literally, trends.co is your next business idea delivered weekly. Trends is a publication by The Hustle that tracks emerging industries and trends before they explode, and then shows you how to capitalize on them. They also have a very active Facebook community that would be very encouraging of any sort of conversation. I might just show you that very quickly because I was having a look at it during the week, and one of the things that really stood out to me was that a more recent trend, albeit morbid, was actually the modernization of death care. And so we're moving away from what are cremations and burials towards actually having your body decompose and then using the decomposed matter to grow what is a tree or anything otherwise. So you can see that all of these trends are weird and wonderful, but again, you might be inspired by something that is obviously communicated through their latest signals. Beyond trends, you could explore what the world is searching through Google Trends. So Google is obviously an incredibly powerful business. They have something very similar, but you can do it by geography. And so you can go through what is Google Trends and quite literally see what people across the world are searching. And that might be indicative of an opportunity to support what is that search criteria. So again, my advice, keep an eye on trends. Now, has anyone heard of femme vases? No, neither had I. Certainly not until my wife requested that I make her one at our social club pottery class last week. There are literally companies making thousands of dollars a month selling these femme vases online. Let's check one out. Right. Now, guys, I'm the least artistic person in the room, so obviously trying to recreate one of these was a bit of a challenge for me. But so inspired was I by this in vogue trend that I've actually decided to go and launch my own site in 4 weeks after my most recent masterpiece has dried. Check this out. I think Jess might be ordering one online, if I'm honest. Probably won't leave that one up on the screen for everybody to see, but jokes aside, I actually support a number of e-commerce businesses that are generating hundreds of thousands of dollars a month selling on-trend products online. Sustainability seems to be the flavor of the month, with one company selling metal pegs, another eco-friendly art books, and one looking to eliminate single-use plastics, like Zero Co Australia. Again, something that I thought was quite inspiring and worth checking out. The idea here is that they give you one, let's call it container, and you send that away to be refilled. So again, they're playing on what is that sustainability trend. None of these ideas are necessarily rocket science, but they sure as hell are trendy. Okay, that was bad, I'll stop, I promise. But on to my next piece of advice. 2, simplify something complex, just like Canva and Atlassian. Melanie Perkins, founder of Canva, used to teach students how to program, such as InDesign and Photoshop. Programs that people found hard to learn and even harder to use. Her goal was to take the entire design ecosystem, integrate it into one page, and make it accessible to the world. Simple, right? For those of you who haven't seen it already, you must check it out. Remember that time I told you not to spend your money on brand? Instead, have a crack at it yourself using Canva. In the interests of time, I'm going to park the already well-published stories of Afterpay and Atlassian. But quite simply, Afterpay simplified lay-by, and Atlassian simplified communication and collaboration. And now on to my final piece of advice. 3, solve your own problem. I think we should play a little game to demonstrate this piece of advice. How about a quick game of Guess Who? Best of 3 wins. In 2007, friends Brian and Joe couldn't afford the rent on their San Francisco apartment. Problem, right? There was a design conference coming to San Francisco and the city's hotels were fully booked. So they came up with the idea of renting out 3 airbeds on their living room floor and cooking breakfast for their guests. They set up a simple blog and got 3 renters, 2 guys, 1 girl, for $80 each. After a small success, they enlisted a former flatmate and computer science graduate, Nathan, to develop the website and join the venture. And so, which company was born? Airbnb. That's right. Simply by solving their own problem. Next up, Evan, Reggie, and Bobby, 3 friends from college, were testing out their entrepreneurial skills. During a casual, not causal, chat, Reggie said, "I wish these photos I am sending this girl would disappear." Problem, right? Immediately, Evan referred to it as $1 million idea. The friends started working on the app and launched in the name of Peekaboo. But later, after a clash with Reggie, Evan and Bobby asked him to leave and changed the name to Snapchat. Again, solving their own problem. Finally, after a conference in Paris, Travis and Garrett were complaining about the many crappy things we all have to deal with in life, including finding a cab. Problem, right? The next thing you know, the 2 were brainstorming, thinking about ways to find cars at the right price at the right time. Uber went on to reach a valuation of $17 billion in 5 years because two mates solved their own problem. In conclusion, I offer you this. The best way to get ahead is simply getting started. So tonight, instead of scrolling through Instagram or defaulting to Netflix, I challenge you to clear your throat and sing your story. Don't be afraid to start over. You may just like your new version better. P.S. I definitely wasn't the Milky Bar kid in the 1991 TV commercial. But hey, it makes for one hell of a story. You guys have been awesome. Thank you very much. So I think, Charlotte, at this point, we might open the floor to any questions if people want to reach out.
I have a question.
Please.
What was your first startup when you started doing all of this kind of thing?
Yeah, so I actually had an opportunity in my final year of university to study at the Copenhagen Business School. And as a part of that program, I had to write a business plan for a business that I ultimately went on to found with a partner. And that business was actually in the golf industry, which was quite unique, but an industry that I knew particularly well, having grown up on a golf course. And so I had identified a problem with the current methodology of pitch mark repair. So essentially when a golf ball lands on a green, it causes an indentation. And if left unrepaired, that indentation comes back and scars the green such that the next day, after a big round of play, it may look as though that green has chickenpox. And so I actually worked with an engineer. We designed a product that essentially eliminated that dead core and essentially closed what was the healthy turf back into the cavity. And so we launched what was a product to the golf industry. I'd love to stand before you and say that it was hugely successful, but as many of you founders probably acknowledge, I actually tripped myself up a couple of times along the journey. And so I thought that I was the bee's knees, having gone out there. I was successfully selling this product all across different golf courses in New South Wales at the time, thinking new beauty. Our business partner had just landed an opportunity to sit down with an investor. That investor has said, hey, I want to buy the rights to distribute this product off you for $1 million a year, and I'm going to pay you a royalty on every unit that was sold. And you can probably imagine that as a 22-year-old kid, I was pretty stoked about that. Until, of course, it got to the due diligence stage. And the due diligence required that there was some observation of what was the IP. Was there a patent that existed to protect what was the IP? I had always held the view that your patent was only as good as your ability to defend it, meaning that if Titleist, one of the biggest golf brands in the world, had decided that they were going to go out and copy what was my product, there wasn't really a lot that I could do about it. I didn't have the capital to be able to go and defend that in court. What I didn't realize was that actually it was that IP that investor was going to license. And because I had gone down the path of commercializing, meaning I'd actually sold units, that product was now in the public domain and there was no IP to protect with a patent anymore. So again, to answer the question, Charlotte, I launched a product to the golf industry, learned many, many lessons, still exited that business quite successfully in the end. But again, there was a number of lessons learned that could have enhanced what was the valuation of that exit.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, another practical kind of question.
Sure.
The Trends website that you showed,
Yes.
I've heard of that before, but it's got a fairly expensive subscription
It does.
price. It's like $100.
I think it's $299 and that might even be USD.
Yeah.
But
Worth it?
well, for me, absolutely, right? Especially in my role now as an advisor, just being across what are all of those trends, trying to inspire, I suppose, that startup scale-up ecosystem. But if you wanted to dip your toe, you can actually do so for 2 weeks for $1, I think. But the blog itself is actually written by the guys at The Hustle. And The Hustle is a newsletter that some of you might be familiar with, but again, I find that content absolutely brilliant. It's very engaging. It's how I start my day over a cup of coffee. But obviously they've just launched what is trends.co. I have subscribed and I think it's brilliant.
And someone just asked on the YouTube, hi Jarrod, great presentation. I would like to ask, what is the best pitch you've seen up until now?
The best sales deck I've ever seen is obviously Zora. Every time I see that, I get motivated to go out and tell this weird and wonderful story about the promised land. So Zora, by far and away, is the best sales deck that I've ever seen. In terms of the best pitch that I have ever seen, it's actually a really good question, because I say this, of course, very respectfully, but when I'm seeing the pitch for the first time, it's usually very, very early on in the piece, and the pitch requires a lot of work. And I think that experience is what lent me today to wanting to coach and inspire and motivate you guys to rethink, reimagine, and retell your own stories. So Zora is the best sales deck that I've ever seen. I'd highly recommend that you guys go away and download that and see if you can't use what is that kind of flow in adapting your own story. But yeah, the question is actually really challenging. The initial pitch is probably something that needed a lot of work when I first see it. Cool.
Thank you so much, Jarrod. We will put together the resources that you've spoken about in today's and send it out to everyone who signed up, and we'll send out the live stream recording as well. Thank you so much for coming
My
along.
pleasure. Thank you, guys.